Today, we talk about classes. Frank, how could you? I've never felt so betrayed in my entire life. We have been friends for, 3-4 years now? I've lost count. You disgust me.
Charles, I just got a haircut. I'm sorry.
But what about my needs? What about the hair that I've lost over the years? Why couldn't you give it to me? I could have made some type of hair helmet with it.
Welcome to What is Tabletop, where the real important questions are answered. Don't let your friends lose their hair. Stop haircuts today. That was the PSA we're going for?
Hi, I'm Charles, and I'm hairless.
You know, the first step is admitting.
Oh, I think you're supposed to say bald.
No. No. You're not bald. I want to say you're bald.
I'm balding, for sure.
So, Charles, what are we talking about today?
I think it's something school-related, classes or something.
So we're going to talk about the bourgeoisie versus, I forget what are the proletariat? I didn't do. I'm a history guy, but not Russian history.
Yeah, the bourgeoisie was also China too, so I don't know, man.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about classes and class systems. No, not that one, even though for the algorithm, yes, that one.
Whatever classes you can think of that will bring you to our video, that's what it's about.
But first, like, comment, and subscribe. You can stop the bourgeoisie or become a fighter, whichever one's easier, by liking, comment, and subscribing. Let us know what class you are in real life, including the weird ones like oubliette.
I have questions.
And then, of course, we have our Discord where you can continue the conversation with us. We have a great community there. Super excited.
Join our Patreon. We have multiple tiers. See what best fits for you, you know?
Yeah, pay us.
Yeah.
Continue the class system.
Yeah. If you like hierarchy, only the coolest and best bourgeoisie get the highest, tier of...
Help me take down Charles. King Charles. It works on so many levels.
It does. I've got a very regal name.
All right, let's get to it. Classes.
Right,
let's actually we've done this enough.
So let's talk about, Frank, what is a class system in reference to tabletop gaming?
Yeah, so we did a video almost a year ago, which I don't like knowing how quickly time passes, talking about skills and classes. So check that out. We're going to use a lot of the reference points from that video, kind of just, yada-yadaing to get there.
I will say Frank will be using a lot of referencing because I don't remember the video at all.
That's so great that we were so informative, Charles.
Woohoo!
So basically, there's usually this idea that there's class systems versus skills-based systems, right? And so a class system, what it tends to do is has a bunch of different archetypes that you can easily slot a character into, and it's then going down a defined path. Even in that class, you can still make some branching choices and do things, but usually it's very limited. So the best way I can describe this is there's two different kinds of ways you can make a game when it comes to character creation, because player options is very important. Do you want it to be the player is going to make a decision and they have A, B, or C? Okay, they make decision A, cool, and then they go down a little bit further down the path and then they make another decision, so on and so forth. That's more class systems where you're limiting the scope early on, so then that way they're not bogged down by how much can happen, versus a skill-based system, which is just here's the infinite amount of paths you can have, figure it out as you go.
Okay.
So I think ultimately the benefit of classes, the benefit is that you get rid of this choice paralysis, because I don't know if you've met people like this. I have met people like this, that even in D&D where you have 13 classes, they're still but I don't know which one to do. And then there's so many subclasses. And then it's no. Just think normally. What are you wanting to do? Let's explain it.
Right. I will say I do suffer from this from time to time. If you give me a lot of choices, this will be fun. This will be I'll be creating multiple timelines of characters. Well, if I play this character this way or this, I do struggle with that from time to time. But typically what I'll do is I'll settle on one. At first I got to look at the class. I'm not looking at subclasses.
Right.
Not looking at,
you don't want the future decisions.
Yeah, exactly. Now. I'm if I were playing a level 1 character, or just starting off, what do I want my character to be?
Right.
Okay. So, because once I have my race or species or whatever they're calling it now, and once that's taken care of, that will hugely lend my decision making into what class I'll be as well.
Right.
Because I do like to optimize to a degree.
Yeah. And again, that's the nice thing about classes. Now, some people will say there's a downside to it, which is the fact that by having these options available, by having these specific archetypes there, you are kind of limiting the kind of characters people can create, right?
Yeah, it puts up those barriers, but again, I think it's great for people who are new to table, like learning RPGs for the most part, because it kind of puts up those bumpers, like for
the
bowling.
guardrails isn't a problem.
Yeah.
But like, let's bring up this point. If I am playing a guy who uses magic and occasionally a sword and sings a lot, what kind of a class is that?
You sound like a real winner to me.
Yeah, so most people would say a bard, right?
Yeah.
But arguably, I could be a fighter, an Eldritch Knight fighter, so I have some spells, I use a sword, and then I just happen to sing, right? But there's this idea that, no, the singing class is the bards, right? That's exclusive to them. Like, you don't want to, like, dip your toes into too many other things.
I guess it depends on who's running the game too.
Right.
It's because I could never imagine limiting oh, hey, I want to be a warlock, but my warlock is a famous singer. I'm like, okay, cool, you're done.
I'm saying class systems, what they tend to do is like it can cause some people to think, oh, I can't
put you in a box.
It puts you in a box. Like if I wanted to be a thief, I have to be a rogue. Yeah. Right. If I have to do this thing. Now, again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Especially when like there's a lot of ideas out there of like what is a good party, right? So specifically in D&D, and we stick in D&D for a little bit. We'll go on to some better RPGs. There is this idea, right? There's like a tank and like the damage dealers and then the healer, but then there's like the auxiliary guys, right? Yeah. The problem with like 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons is it doesn't do that out front. Right? That's something you have to kind of like figure out. And even then it's still like arguable, like is a monk more of an auxiliary? Or is it more of like a damage dealer? Is the bard more auxiliary, or is it more of a spellcaster, right? The arguments get there. Now, there is a version of D&D that does actually split them up, and it's 4th edition.
Hey, 4th edition.
So 4th edition actually classifies each class as specific archetypes. There's like the leader, the tank, and like the 2 others that I can't remember off the top of my head. But the idea is if you have a party of 4 people, 1 person picks from each section. So now, instead of having 12 classes to pick from, you're having 3. Because you're having the 4 that you choose, and you're like, okay, Charles is going to be the tank. I'm going to choose the leader class. Well, now I have Warlord, Bard, and I think it's like Paladin or something. I don't remember. But the idea is you have those 3 now that you can choose from, and then you can, it's less choices in that regard. Indominate also does that a little bit, where it's literally kind of just 5 classes. Now, they kind of, what they do is they split their class choice twice. You have your first class choice, which is your archetypes, and then your second class choice, which is your powers.
I love the idea of mixing and matching your character's power. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm a hunter, but I could be a blaster or not a blaster. I'm a hunter. I can be have earth powers or ice powers or things like that. I think it's cool because it kind of flavors your character a little differently, and it kind of also kind of informs some even some narrative choices, or potentially inform some narrative choices for you.
And what's nice is that they have different options for the powers that do obviously fit certain archetypes a little bit better than others, but not to the extent that it's problematic. Like, I have to take this every time.
Right.
Like, you can still be a guardian who's more defensive organized, but take 1 defensive power and 1 offensive power. And it's like, maybe you synergize a little bit better with the defensive power, but maybe not, and that's an interesting idea. And I do like that a little bit. It's kind of funny how by splitting the choice, you actually do make a much more interesting character that way.
I think it's a nice way to kind of show, this is what you can do.
Yeah.
Without bogging down, again, especially for new players, bogging them down with, here's a bunch of skills. Here's 1,000 skills.
Yeah.
Pick 5.
Yeah, and then people might feel like they picked the wrong one, and it becomes a whole thing for sure. Pathfinder kind of does something similar, except in the opposite direction.
All right.
Where the first edition of Pathfinder had the core 12 classes, and then they were like, well, we also have some cool ideas for this kind of a class and this kind of a class, and then they just started being like, what happens if we put a fighter and a sorcerer together? What does that give us? What happens if we put a ranger and a rogue? Well, that's a slayer class. What happens if we do this and this? That's the investigator class. And then they just started doing that, and it was one of those cool things where you're like, oh, this is a swashbuckler is I think the fighter and the rogue put together, which is oh, that's really cool. I want to play a swashbuckler, and it has its own unique mechanics. But now we're getting back into the whole thing of well, now you have too many choices. You have too many things you could do.
Again, especially if you're someone who can't make a decision, you're not going to want to focus a whole lot on making those decisions. A lot of times we're like, what do you, because I think we've had players be like, well, what do we need? They'll look at oh, we don't have a healer because that's 90 times 99% of the time our problem. We don't have someone who can heal.
Yeah, that's most people's problems. No one I've only met out of my many times of playing D&D, one person who enjoys playing a healer, and his name's Brett Cotton. Yeah. He's the only person who enjoys healing people.
It's like, here, let me heal you. No, I'm good. I'm fine.
Well, it's funny because I'll even find like people who will heal, but then they're like, well, I also want to do damage as much as I want to heal. So I'm going to heal a little bit and then deal a lot of damage.
Well, and like with our current campaign too, we have like
Zach Dunkerton.
We have Zach Dunkerton being the cleric, but we really don't have any casters beyond that, and he's
right.
Yeah, and even his casting, I guess, is I guess he's a normal caster, but it's just not a lot of damage dealing casting.
Yeah. So here's what's interesting too, right? Getting back into it is 5th edition doesn't have that requirement in the rules that you need to have a healer. But if you play the game enough, you recognize how important healing actually is. How, like, if you're not careful, you're going to die a lot, and you don't want to die a lot. Like, the tank classes usually don't have a lot of self-healing. Right. And if they do, it's like very taxing on the action economy. Mm-hmm. But again, the game doesn't tell you like, hey, make sure you have either a cleric, a bard, or a druid. It just says, here are the classes, right? And so I almost think that like organizing classes based off of archetype is actually really important and really good. They did add something in the new 5th edition rules, which told you like the complexity and how difficult it is to play each class, like the barbarian being one of the easier ones and the wizards being one of the more complicated.
Yeah, I did like that. That was an interesting take, or interesting way to, especially again for new players.
Right. How do you feel about systems like Powered by the Apocalypse or Daggerheart, where there are different classes, but the character sheet is also different depending on which class you do?
I think that's nice too, because again, that takes out even more guesswork, because now you're just focusing really, I think, on your abilities at that point. Beyond that,
yeah, it's nice too because it also quickens up character creation to some extent.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the downside is like you don't want to print off the character sheets until it's too late, and this and that. Mm-hmm. But
and that was the one thing with like Avatar. How many character sheets did we have for how many different types?
Well, there's like 10, and then I had 4 extra because of the Kickstarter. So
it's 14, and again, you're typically going to play someone different too. You're not going to have someone 2 people playing the same archetype, if you will, the same character. So
and I do feel like those games actually make it to where playing the same thing is not. Like it's harder to customize playing the same thing, right? Going back to Indominant, and we're not just bragging on them because they're our friends. What I do like is with specifically the powers part of character creation, it feels different. If you're a blaster and I'm a guardian, but we both take ice, it's gonna feel different, right? Mm-hmm. And like the things we choose are different. So we might have the same powers on the surface, we might have a similar class there, but we're gonna act differently with how we use our powers versus like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons or any of these other games where like how different are you going to act when you have your class, right? Well, how different is the barbarian from the fighter versus the monk? There's some differences for sure, but you can also, especially once we get into certain subclasses, right? And we'll talk about subclasses in a second. Well, like that starts to make it to where, oh, this thing that's supposed to be an archetype, the warlock's supposed to be a caster, but now you can take the hexblade and now it's a martial. So like, why would you even like, what's the point of doing that?
Where it's like, okay, now you basically have this character, but just underneath a different name.
Right. It's several different magicians with fancy hats.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So we were talking about classes, but D&D does this as this is subclasses.
Yeah. Basically, it's another decision point within the character creation aspect. Usually, forgot to mention this at the top, but usually class systems have leveling up mechanics. You start one way, and then like as you level up, it becomes obvious, oh, here's a decision point, here's a decision point. And usually one of those decision points is an archetype within the archetype. Right. So for example, you might be a fighter, but do you want to be a fighter that always hits and has a higher chance to critically hit? Do you want to be more of an spellcasting fighter? Do you want to be one that does really cool things with their fists, right? Like all of it, there can be so many different options with that. And then that's where a lot of fun can come in, where you can have such unique things like the Rune Knight fighter, which uses magical runes to like activate things, which is kind of like spells, but not really. The benefits of those kind of things is like you can get some really interesting things, like really interesting ideas that are going to be unique to your game. The downside is it's another decision point. And if you have a lot of them, again, choice paralysis is still a thing. And usually, from what I've seen, people don't wait till 3rd level or whatever later level it is. They usually are like thinking ahead enough, like, no, this is already what I want to do. And Like occasionally you'll have the people who are like, no, let me see where my character is, and then I'll make the choice. But a lot of the times you want to know what it is going into it. And so you're already making decisions ahead of time based off of it, which then brings the question of what's the point of having it later levels if you're just going to already know what the decision is?
Yeah, especially experienced tabletop gamers. I feel like we know what we want at the beginning typically. I know there are some out there, like, again, if you have a tough time making decisions in general, then yeah, maybe you struggle with it. But for the most part, I think once I make a decision for my class in 5th edition, I already know what my subclass is.
Yeah.
I already have. Again, that could change. Something could happen narratively in the story that I'm like, oh, it actually makes better just to play this one. Because I have had that happen before where when I got to my subclass, I was like, oh, this is actually a better subclass than.
But I would say that's rarer than anything.
Yeah, I would.
And then we talk about like what I've already stated, where you can have the issue of, okay, what happens if this class was actually a barbarian, right? And now you're taking the thing that's unique to one class and giving it to another class, making it a little less unique in the process.
Watering it down. That original class, yeah.
Yeah, and so then like it becomes like, well, what's the point of ever taking that class again if I could just get that ability at this level with this character, right?
Yeah.
And so you do run the risk of homogenizing there again, where it's like, well, now everything just casts spells and hits really hard and has a 20 charisma, and
And that's why I think it is important also to limit those things because again, I think feeling unique as a character is cool. I would hate to go into a game where, unless it was designed for us all to be like warlocks or rogues or whatever, but I would hate to go into a game where we all just happen to choose like different classes, but ultimately we're the same character because they're able to dip into a lot of what my class was known for, just for the sake of like having options and choices.
Talking about if you're going to have subclasses have those decisions early on in character creation. Most Powered by the Apocalypse games do that, right? Yeah. The games where your character sheet is your class, they usually are like pick 2 of the 4 following abilities.
Right.
And so that's cool because now there is a sense of replayability because you're like, oh, I chose these 2 things, but like I could see Charles choosing the 2 opposite things that I chose, right? And there's some nice flavor and customizability that goes in there. And again, it's something that you're doing at the beginning of the thing. Like you're not like, oh, eventually I could get this really cool ability. It's like, no. You're always going to get the really cool ability later on. But the way that what makes your character unique as opposed to someone else playing that version of that class is the decision points you make at the beginning.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that's a good way to do it. Pathfinder does 2nd edition specifically does something interesting. They don't have subclasses. I mean, they kind of do. They do technically have subclasses, and you make decisions within that. But what's something else they do is because you take a lot of feats, you can also take what's called archetype feats. And archetype feats is when you start to have like, okay, well, what I wanted to really focus on ranged like fighting. Cool, I'm going to take those kind of archetype feats. But then there's also like the more flavorful ones where it's like, I'm a shadow dancer and I'm going to do really cool stuff that way.
Sorry to hear the term shadow dancer. It's like, what? I haven't played Pathfinder, so
it's okay. I don't remember if that's an actual thing. I'm just making things up.
Gotcha. I would make sure I was like.
Now, an additional thing that it does, and this will lead into our next topic, is you don't multi-class in Pathfinder 2e. You have to choose an archetype and then choose that other class that you would want to multi-class into's archetype. And so, like, if you're a fighter and you're like, I really want some rogue stuff, you choose the rogue archetype. And that allows you to get some rogue things. And this deals with the problem we just talked about a little bit of homogenizing, where it allows you to only have, like, a few benefits, but not all of them. Versus in multi-classing, where you just straight up take the additional class. So, Charles, explain multi-classing.
So multi-classing is when you have multiple classes. So you start off with one class, and then later on, you choose another class. But you can only go up in certain levels. You can't go up in both. You can't level up in both of them. So you have to choose which one you're going to level up in.
Yeah, and usually there's like it's the trade-off of the higher level stuff you're not going to get because you're taking those. And again, an issue that can arise is homogeny, where it's like, well, we're all going to take a 2-level dip into fighter, so we all get Accent Surge.
Yeah,
that's one of the few things they actually did fix in the new rules. Is that
I saw that.
Yeah, because it used to be like. Spellcasters would take Action Surge because they could cast a second spell.
Yeah, and again, that's a pretty powerful thing to be able to do multiple. Be able to do multiple actions in one go, in one round is a fantastic thing. Yeah. If people could take, if there was a skill where you could take multiple reactions, people would jump on that too. So.
Right. And it's what we talked about this in many of our design live streams, and I try to remind Charles whenever he comes up with a cool thing. It's like, okay, is this ability cool? Yes. all right, is this a character option that everyone's going to almost always choose?
Right.
And if the answer is they're always going to choose it, why make it an option? Why not just make it part of the thing, right? And so that's kind of the same thing with like, well, you're always going to, everyone's going to want action surge. So you either need to nerf action surge to where it's more limited, like only certain people can really benefit from having it, or you could just give everybody it. And it's not unreasonable to give everybody action surge because in 4th edition, you got action points that you could like store and then spend to do extra actions.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it would make sense for everyone to have access to that kind of skill, because I get frustrated. I'm like, well, I can cast a spell once and then I have to wait a whole turn.
Yeah. Peter talked about this in the live stream we most recently did at the time of this recording, where he was saying you don't want action economy to be based off of character creation.
Right.
Because if some characters get to go 3 times a turn and you get to go 2 times a turn, that stacks up. And it's obvious too, because if you're taking 5 minutes per action, I'm taking 10 minutes for 2, Charles is taking 15, it's going to be noticeable that, oh, it's a user error, that I am the reason my character isn't doing as well as everyone else because I didn't build it as well, and that doesn't feel good.
Even looking at the game that we're developing, I like the idea that everyone has the same amount of actions, and if they want more than that, they could sacrifice things. So for that,
yeah. So I mean, that's the interesting thing, is you got to be careful about that, and this is where playtesting comes really in handy. Is you want people who are going to min max, because what they're going to do is they're going to find those multi-classing options and be like, hey, did you know how powerful it is to put a sorcerer and a paladin together? You might want to put some nerf on the paladin smites because sorcerers get spell slots quicker than paladins, which means a 10th level paladin sorcerer multi-class, it already has the highest level smite that they're going to have access to, which is insane, right? Because you're supposed to wait till 17th level as a normal paladin, but now you're saying oh, if I actually do this work, I get benefited more. And so that's why you have to have these that's why you'll see certain games have weird conditions, because you're why is this weird condition here? It's because otherwise you would make a really broken character otherwise.
What about some other games? What about Fabio Ultima? How do they do their class system?
So what's fascinating about Fabio Ultima is it is exclusively multi-classing. So basically what you do is you have a bunch of skills or professions is what they call them. It's sharpshooter, scholar, alchemist, just a bunch of different things that fit in a JRPG, right? Yeah. Those different kind of roles. And then what you do is you have to take at least 2 to 3 of them when you make your character, right?
Oh, wow.
So we talked about this. In order to simulate a JRPG, you start at level 5 instead of level 1. And the idea is every time you level up, you take another point in one of those professions. So at level 5, you have 5 points to take. And the rules say you have to take it in multiple skills or multiple professions. You can't just have one. And so what's cool is even in the examples it gives you in the book, it's saying, hey, you could be this kind of a character, which is this skill, and this skill put together. And it makes some really dynamic characters that way. It also helps to where it's not homogenous, right? You're not oh, we're all becoming the same thing unless you're intentionally doing so.
Gotcha.
And then what's also interesting about it, on top of all that, is being part of it makes such interesting, unique characters, right? So I've looked at it and I'm oh, I want to be a scholar sharpshooter for sure. A book nerd who has a crossbow. That's so cool.
That sounds like a character you'd make, Frank.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's you can pick from the 3. It's you're able to find something that works for what you want to.
Yeah, and then it allows you to fill in gaps a lot easier too. Yeah. Right? Because it's also something where every time you level up, if you've noticed man, we really need this kind of a thing, you just someone takes a level in it.
Yeah, that's
right?
awesome.
Because that's the thing with other multi-classing is if you're wanting to role play, it can hurt you to be wow, my character was really impacted by that druid that came with us and died for us. So he's going to learn how to be a druid. It's cool, but you're this other thing, you're this monk. That's not going to work well. It's not going to synergize as well as you think it will.
Exactly. So it sounds like Fabio Ultima has a system in place where it's whatever you pick is probably going to work together in some form or another. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool idea. And then again, it doesn't tell you by picking these 3, you have to be this thing. You get to kind of come up with what does that mean for my character? Yeah. Who am I based off of picking these 2 or 3 professions? Yeah. And then, I think that's a really interesting way of doing it for sure. I
will say the more we talk about Fabio Ultima, the more I really want to play, because I grew up playing the JRPGs, video games, stuff like that. So I'm I really want to play this game. So
Yeah, unfortunately, our group has decided that we are playing D&D for eternity, Charles.
So let's talk about a game we have played. Star Wars.
So Star Wars might be... This is where it gets into the muddy territory of, is it skills or is it classes?
It feels very skills because of how you get certain abilities, but it's also classes. It's interesting, yeah.
So here's what's interesting, and the Brandon Sanderson Cosmere RPG does the same thing because it's the same people. So I'm not surprised it's the same thing. What happens is you have skill trees that you go down, right? And so like feat trees is not uncommon where it's like you need this prerequisite before you can do this. But with Star Wars specifically, you choose a like specialization, right? Or something like that. You choose like a career. And that is your class. So you're like, I'm a bounty hunter. Okay. Within the bounty hunter, you have 3 like specializations. Do you want to be a gadget bounty hunter? Do you want to be an assassin bounty hunter? Or do you want to be whatever the third one is? Because Charles didn't pick that one. And so you choose, based off of that, which ones you go into, and then you start there, and then you're starting to spend XP to gain those skills that pop up. And so now you have these special abilities that activate because you put XP into them. But at any point, you can go into another specialization in the same career and choose that. But then you can also go into other careers and spend more XP to get those specializations. And that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah. And well, the thing is, though, too, is like there is a sacrifice to do that.
Yes.
Because, again, you can multi-class, if you will. You know, you can go into multiple professions, multiple jobs or whatever, but you're spending more and more resources every time you dive into a new one. So it does, I feel like, to me, optimally, 2 really is all you need, maybe 3 at the most.
Well, I think you are limited by what kind of things you can choose. Like, you couldn't just choose any other career.
Right.
There's some careers that are universal careers.
Yeah.
And you can always basically multi-class into those.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Like Force sensitive is one of those.
Yeah.
Where you can be like, oh, I'm realizing everyone else has magical Jedi powers and I don't. Okay, I'm going to be a Force sensitive bounty hunter, which you almost did.
So close. But yeah.
We did that as a joke because Jeffrey was playing the Jedi.
We were going to mess with them a little bit because like I was going to start using Jedi like mind tricks and stuff on people, just really without him knowing this. And so when it happened for the first time, he'd be like, "What?"
And again, what's nice about this is it gets rid of homogeny,
right?
In the sense of you are still locked into these archetypes and these ideas, right? But you get to have a little bit more freedom, so you're not always choosing the same ideas. And so like how I make a bounty hunter is going to be different than how you make a bounty hunter, which is I think that's the best way you can go about that. Ultimately, in my opinion, what you want to avoid in class systems is everyone makes the same character, or there's too many options to the point where like they don't know what to do, and now they are making broken like characters that don't work in the combat.
Yeah, and that can happen because like I think I found myself with my first character kind of like, not that my character wasn't viable. I liked my character. It's just it was one of those things where I was expecting to play it one way, and then but it didn't feel right, so I had to play it a certain. So my character became boring to me pretty quickly. Unfortunately, that was on me.
Yeah, and this is the downside of having too many options.
Yeah,
is when you choose things, and if you either do one or two options, you either have to read through every single option, which is a lot, and a lot of people aren't going to be reading through every single thing, or you're going to have to go off of like the decision trees being very good at describing your decisions, right? So if we're looking at bounty hunter, gadgeteer versus assassin versus the third one, if you can't describe well in a little blurb, like here's what a gadgeteer ultimately does, here's what the assassin ultimately does, you're going to have people who choose one of those options, and then they're going to get mad because it's not the option they wanted.
Right.
I think we had that with Jeffrey. Yeah. He wasn't sure which Jedi he wanted to be. He originally wanted to be this one, but then it wasn't good because it was not, it didn't work out, but then he wanted this other one, and it like, he's like, oh, but now I want, and like that's the downside to some extent of the Star Wars RPG. Yeah. Is there's too many things. Or you just are Zach Dunkerton, who knew exactly what he wanted. He was a diplomat who just did great.
Yeah, talk about optimization, man. He did a great job with his character. Yeah. And again, now he had some exposure to this prior to us anyway, so like he had a leg up on most of us when it came to this game. So.
Yeah, so I would argue, if we're going to give any advice to people out there creating class systems, make sure the decision points are narrowed enough to where they're not overbogged. Yeah. But you want the decision points to be obvious what's happening when you make each decision, right?
Yeah. You want flexibility, but you also don't, because again, when you make it too broad, it makes it difficult to play that character. When you have like, oh, well, I'm a warlock, paladin, bard. I'm like, okay, what does that look like? Right.
Unless that's the point, is that you're a Warlock Paladin
Well,
board. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, exactly. Again, there might some of you in the comments might be able to be like, "Hey, this is what it looks like," you know, and that's fine. Again, I'm not saying it's impossible, but you could have something where it just doesn't feel like it would work well together.
I think some of the best versions, in my opinion, do be the Power by the Apocalypse versions,
Yeah.
where it's like, here's your character sheet, your decision points are on your character sheet. You make all of those pretty quickly, and it's very obvious what decision points you made.
Right.
Now, obviously, that is more a rules light system, so I understand that it's not going to be easy to replicate that in some harder ones. I do like Fabio Ultimas a lot. That idea of like you're really choosing skills that you're good at, and then from there you are creating a character based off of the skills you choose, which would then be an argument that it's not a class.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I've played JRPGs that, like, when you were talking about that, like, I want to say, like, I can't remember what game it was, but there is a game out there where, like, you take multiple classes or whatever for your characters and stuff like that, where it makes sense,
right?
Like, because you're pulling certain abilities from those things. It's more about like pulling the abilities than it is that actual, like, what that class represents.
Right.
So
yeah, and so you want the decisions to be obvious. You don't want to bog people down with too many choices. You don't want to have it be homogenous. Right. Those are the big pitfalls you want to avoid. Outside of that, kind of do what you want. I know we have a friend of the channel, Blaze, over at Ishikan World Shapers, probably pronounced that wrong. Definitely would spell it wrong. But he has like an insane amount of character options. But the nice thing is that it's not all right, what do you want to be? It's, okay, hey, here's some simple questions. I'm going to walk you through it. Which of these things sounds interesting to you? All right, you click that. Now, here's 3 options. All right, you click that. Now, here's a few more.
See, I like that concept of that, where it's like, you know, you're basically taking a survey.
Yes.
Like, and to kind of figure out what character you're going to play, what character you would best suit you. Yeah. So you're kind of molding, you're kind of using yourself as the template to create your own character, which is kind of nice.
What can be difficult is people who think they understand themselves but don't. I remember when I first got into Magic the Gathering, I was like, oh, white, blue, control deck. That's exactly how I want, because like you said, I do value intelligence. Yeah. It's like, I want to be able to control and manipulate my opponent, only to find out that as I played the game, I'm an aggro dude through and through.
It's really, and you really are.
It's nice to have those decision points. Now, granted, also with Ishikan World Shapers, you can only really do that online. Yeah. I could not imagine a physical book, which maybe there's a way to do it.
I bet you there is a way to do it where you can kind of do, like, it would take some time. It would be most of your session 0, but instead of you would just give like a survey to your players and like fill this out, and then they would like you would do it like in like, what desperate housewife are you? You know, type of quiz magazine.
You could do something similar to what Traveler does, where it's right, it's the decision points in character creation, and so like then Traveler kind of has classes. We could have talked about that.
Yeah, Traveler's an interesting. It's a different monster in and of itself. Again, character creation is so much fun, but that is like the entire session 0.
Yeah, basically in Traveler, you're rolling randomly to determine what kind of skills you get, and you have like careers that you choose, which arguably could be classes. I don't consider them classes. To me, they're more like the outlets for how you get the skills. So that's kind of, like I said, we already reached skills versus like the muddiness with Fabio Ultima. Right. I think Traveler, you do not have classes. Bold and period.
Yeah, I agree. It's skills.
Yeah. So anyway, we hope you appreciated our video on classes. If you have any ideas for other videos, you put them down below or join our Discord and let us know, because we have stolen so many ideas from our Discord for videos we're going to make.
Oh, 100%. Please give us more ideas to steal.
And you can obviously join us on Patreon, where we will listen to you a little bit more than everybody else.
So yes, leave a comment. We'll steal from you without acknowledging you. But if you're on our Patreon, we'll acknowledge that we stole it from you.
And as always, everybody, play more games.
Play more games, yeah.
Stay witty.
Create more games.
And stay witty.
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 Stay witty.
Witty.